Hey, welcome to the Citizen Mike Show. Thanks for tuning in. We do appreciate it. My name is Mike Brudzinski, and somewhere on that split screen, I see him there, Joe Marrone and Tom Laffin, newly re-elected members of the Wallingford Town Council. Guys, congratulations, you're on the council for another two-year term. How do you feel about that, Joe, and then Tom?
I feel great about it. It's a great. I asked for the job, so you really can't feel any other way about it. But no, it's truly an honor. Every time I've been elected, it's very humbling, to have people check off your name on the ballot.
Tom?
Ditto. Yeah, no, it is great. It's humbling. It's a lot of work goes into it, and you spend some time during the 2 years questioning whether you're approaching something from the right angle. So it's some sort of validation that some people think you're okay.
Yeah, and you're glad to have the campaign and election behind you, I'm sure.
Yes.
Hey, let's talk about our first topic, which is GotSpace, the data centers. And the reason why I wanted to talk about that is what happened in the Record Journal on Sunday. I probably would not have addressed this, but for the Steve Knight's editorial and the front page story in the Record Journal. I probably would have let it go. That's been litigated, it's over, but is it really? So let me start this way. And Joe, you're going to be the first to weigh in, because this is kind of directed at you, and I'm reading a bit from Steve Knight's column, and he said, and this goes back to the last council meeting where GotSpace was on the agenda. It says the four who voted against the host agreement last June. Joe, that's you. You're one of the four, right? Okay,
Correct.
Let's get that down.
Correct.
So the four who voted against the host agreement last June appear to be maneuvering. That's you. You appear to be maneuvering to find another means to derail the project, and undo over 2 years of work on something that would be of immense benefit to the entire Wallingford community. Joe, are you pleading guilty to the charges?
Yes, I am pleading guilty. So, and I push back a little bit on the notion of 2 years of, and there may have been work. We wouldn't know. The council. I mean, Steve Knight obviously is privy to information that the council isn't. Right. So, could there be 2 years of work? There could be. The state passed the regulation something like May 30th of this year to allow this, a tax break for data centers. So, did they, in anticipation of that particular legislation, or were they trying to woo data centers without that legislation? I can't say. Of course, the council hadn't heard anything about it until they asked us to vote on it, and then 35 days or 38 days later, the council said yes.
Tom, we're gonna get into Steve Knight's article in a little more detail, but just generally speaking, are you sort of sympathetic to Steve Knight's perspective because you voted in favor of the data centers and Joe voted against? So when you take it as a whole, what's your assessment of Steve Knight's perspective?
Yeah, no, largely the sentiment I agree with. The rush, the 2 years thing, and I said this at some point, or 5,000 times. I don't know how many of these meetings were hours long. To me, it didn't seem like it was new or rushed. Maybe as I got elected to the council over 10 years ago, I was in different conversations with companies, tech companies, data center companies, EDC, Tim Ryan. So it's been kind of like into this forever ongoing thing that did disappear for me for a while, because ultimately it came down to this. It just was not profitable to be in the state. And then the legislation came and it was like, boom, hitting the ground running. And, we had a couple executive sessions or whatever, but I know then it all kind of seems to come fast to most people. But to me, this was something I was advocating for 10 years ago. So okay. I am sympathetic to it. Yeah.
Yeah. So let me get to Steve's second paragraph. And here's where I take issue. And one of maybe the main reason why I wanted to talk about it on the show. When there's reporting or opinions, I like them to be fact-based and like them to be accurate. I don't like to see the public being dumbed down, fooled, deceived, or propagandized. It just the way I do the show in part. And you guys have been around, this show and me, and you kind of know that's one of my buttons, I guess. But Steve said something that I couldn't let slide. He said that Wallingford has spent 2 years negotiating with Gottsmith. I think that there's credibility problems with that, but that's minor. I want to slide by that. And they hammered out an agreement that goes into an incredible number of very detailed requirements requested by the town and agreed to by Gottspace, making it appear as if the town drove this hard bargain. They really, wow, the town took them to the woodshed, when probably this agreement came from a template, sort of standard language. But here comes the problem. These detailed requirements, including building height, well, there is one sentence about 45 feet. Sound mitigation, there is 2 paragraphs about sound mitigation, which is barely worth the powder to blow it away. I'll get to that. But there's nothing in the agreement about building setbacks and traffic patterns at all. Yet you read this, and it appears as if the council addressed this with due care, the administration addressed this with due care, and Gottspace made some enforceable promises. In fact, Gottspace did appear in front of the council, and they had some fancy PowerPoint presentations that seemed to represent where roads would go, where setbacks would be, where buildings would be. And they adjusted it in an apparent attempt to satisfy the objections of some of the neighbors dealing with traffic and setbacks and noise and that kind of thing. But none of those materials were incorporated into a written agreement. They were verbal representations made at the time, and they mean absolutely nothing. And that bothers me. Tom, let me go to you first as sort of the defender of the agreement, and then I'll
the agreement, yeah. So yeah, actually, when I read it through the first time, I missed that whole part. I had to go back and was like, where was that? Because I knew we were going to be talking about this. So it's about 30 words of 800. It's not that the details are not in the agreement. And I specifically remember sitting in this chair with similar lighting, talking about how the agreement was going to be a gateway or a door to allow Gottspace into negotiating, having the confidence to negotiate the rest of the system, and have the land use experts hammer all these smaller details out. And right, the plans we had, they were just conceptual. They were not, this is definitely what we're doing. And they were actually the max limits, the max plan. So when it showed on the plan where the building was going to be, it showed the buildings at the 100-foot marker or whatever it is, to show what the worst case scenario would be. So yeah, that statement is not it's not accurate. I don't know if it's a misstatement, or as Joe said, Steve is very involved in the community, EDC, WCI, constantly working with Tim Ryan on a lot of things. We had a presentation like this in Rotary. Now he may have even just thought, based on a more recent updated presentation or some of the talks going on with P&Z, that
okay,
that's what was included.
So I mean, Steve gets his information from somewhere. So whoever he got his information from, whoever he interviewed, believed that these details are in the agreement. There's someone running around town hall, not just Steve, I don't think. And I think that the misinformation has spread. It certainly has now spread farther as a result of his op-ed. The misinformation has spread further because people read this and they say, okay, building setbacks and traffic patterns are all taken care of. And is misinformation damaging? Tom, you seem to minimize it a little bit. I'm going to go to Joe, and I don't know if he'll maximize it, but we'll see. Joe, your turn. Am I making something out of nothing?
Well, I think you raise an interesting point, but I think that the greater point is, who do we have an arrangement with? Because Gottspace, as far as I can tell, has no interest in operating a data center in town. They're a land developer, and so their interest is in developing the land, making a partnership with the town, and then finding a buyer to potentially build the data center, and then they're going to hand it all off to somebody else. So, as you talk about setbacks and all that, I'm not sure if we're talking about Gottspace is going to do this work, or is this going to be, whoever is the person that's actually going to own the building that we're going to deal with later. So it's kind of like the builder building a house, and you say, well, I don't want any kids to live there. And the builder says, no problem, right? No kids are going to live there. But he has no control over who he sells the property to, whether it's, whoever the tenant of that building is going to be the one that's going to determine, a lot of how the noise is produced and so on.
Yeah. So Tom, I'm going to go to you after I finish my comments to mop up this a little bit. So the representations made at the one or two council meetings about the layout of the land, which may have satisfied or calmed some of the neighbors, those representations are not true. The people who made the representations are no longer around. Apparently, based on the reporting, Quinn is not going to be around anymore because GodSpace is not going to be around. There'll be a successor organization, son of GodSpace. They'll be around. And Len Fasano, I have very reliable information. He's not on this gig anymore either. And so there we are. And one counselor and maybe many were relieved to be able to say, it's up to planning and zoning now, as if that's the chief protection. And as you both know, because we go over the topics before the show, so you kind of know where I'm going to rant, that I'm not happy with putting it in the Planning and Zoning Commission. I have all faith in them, but there's some weaknesses there. But Tom, I want to go to you to react to what I said. Then we'll get to P&Z's role.
Yeah, so I want to go back to, so I don't believe the information Steve wrote. I don't think it was malicious. Like you said, he probably interviewed somebody and whatever. You want to talk about P&Z now? You want me to comment on P&Z or after you?
Work it in if it's on your mind.
So the P&Z, I do trust the P&Z. I know the people on there. I trust them. They're very dedicated. Both sides of the aisle. I've talked to them about it personally. I completely trust them. They have a lot of experience between Fitzsimmons and Seichter. So I think I just feel very comfortable with those details being hammered out. And you also have to question, and I don't know this by any sort of means, by any sort of intelligence or facts, but you have to wonder if any of the length, how long it took us to actually go through it caused some of the internal strife, because there was indications that creditors were on their backs about moving things along, and Quinn or whoever in Fasano didn't come through within their original or hoped timelines.
Oh, I don't believe that for a minute. But let me get back to that's. Go ahead, finish your thought.
No, yeah. I was just gonna say, and then as Joe commented on, who are we going to deal with? This is kind of typical standard business, and I was away. I wasn't at the last meeting. I was in Disney World with the family on a long planned trip. But I watched the meeting last night, and the assignment, people were surprised that there was an assignment clause. And I specifically had asked about an assignment clause, and I don't remember which meeting it was in, but that was something that I looked for immediately just from my business experience and working with real estate agreements and licenses and things. So it did come up, but again, there were long meetings. It probably got just, went over people's heads, or their eyes were glazed over. But
before I get to you, I want to clean something up because I made half of a point. I needed to make the full point. And Tom reacted in a way I realized I got to stop now and make my full point. Here's the problem with P&Z. Relying on protections from sound, traffic, relying on P&Z is the regulations have no practical teeth. The host agreement has practical teeth. P&Z does not. They can be as diligent and as honest and as hardworking and as sincere and as skilled and as attentive as they want to be. But in the end, they can only pass a regulation. And to enforce that regulation, you got to go to court. And after, this is a rhetorical tool now, after 4 years of litigation, maybe the town wins if GodSpace is in violation of a noise regulation. The only consequences to GodSpace is they have to stop it. Whereas if the town in the host agreement said, and this goes to whether Steve is right in this carefully crafted agreement, if the host agreement said any violation of the zoning regulations will be a breach of the agreement of the host agreement, the consequences to GodSpace are severe. They would have to pay full taxes and not get the tax break they're getting now. Full taxes from the date of the violation. It could be millions and millions of dollars. But the town didn't see fit to draft that clause in. There's a reason why they didn't do that. And they and the counselors, many, are happy to push it over to P&Z, they'll do the best they can, but in the end, that's not really protection, in my view, as described, against something like too much noise. Joe, your turn.
Well, the town had an issue. We've had a couple of noise issues in the recent past, right? First with the Oakdale and then with Thurston Foods. And I was not on the council for the Oakdale one, but I was for Thurston Foods, where we essentially learned that the current noise regulations have no teeth, right? So there really isn't much the town can do outside of paying for expensive monitoring and stuff. So let's fast forward and say that the data center goes up when there's too much noise. You're going to deal with whoever operates that space, whether that, whatever the tenant is, Pornhub or AlJazeeraTV.com or whatever, who runs that space. And you're going to get up in a legal battle with them over the amount of noise. And does the Wallingford really have the resources to fight that type of an enterprise, in court over noise?
Yeah.
So I think that the town kind of left themselves out on that one, because I think they know that ultimately, if they break the noise ordinance, there's not really anything we can do about it. So, so sort of cut a wide swath. So last time, with Thurston's, we changed the regulation to conform to Thurston's, and I presume that that's what we would try to do again.
Well, I'm talking not about the noise ordinance. I'm talking about zoning regulations, which the P&Z is going to try to craft, I think, to limit noise, kind of like the Amazon proposed Amazon development that got voted down. Noise was an issue raised by the neighbors. They could hear the backup trucks, when the trucks back up, the beep, beep, beep. So I think planning and zoning is going to try to wrestle with excess noise as a zoning regulations, but the way to enforce a zoning regulation is you cite them with a violation, you negotiate, you cite them with a cease and desist, you negotiate, they delay, hypothetically, stall, buy time, you got to take them to court, wait for a trial, wait for a decision, sit out the appeal. Meanwhile, the noise is going on and on and on and on and on. And in the end, if you win in the Connecticut Supreme Court, the most you could do is say to GodSpace, take out a few servers and bring the noise back under control. And there's not a real business incentive for them to comply with the zoning regulations if it's costing them millions of dollars. Tom, I see you chomping at the bit to get at me, so I'm going to switch it over to you to respond. And I'm going to.
Yeah, and my understanding when we were voting on the agreement, and then still now, is the planning and zoning also has to agree to the use. It's a complete change to the land use. So there's a different level of authority and analysis that's going into this and a setup, and they get to establish standards now that they're not typically able to set up. Like the Thurston's Food got grandfathered in. Oakdale was different and weird because of a lot of different reasons. Thurston's tried to warn everybody, and it was kind of a failure on that sense. So planning and zoning really has an opportunity, using both of those experiences, to establish a standard now and agree to the use under their conditions, way before you even get to whether or not it's going to have the teeth. So I think that's also part of the draw.
Got it. I think maybe on another episode, I'll dismantle the host agreement section that deals with sound, because I'm a little bit afraid we get too much in the weeds. But I'm going to allow myself about 30 seconds and allow you each the same if you want it. The host agreement talks about the town's consultant, that if the town's consultant kind of agrees to what GodSpace is proposing, then that's going to be okay to the town of Wallingford. The town of Wallingford is the mayor. That means it's the mayor and Tim Ryan. If it's okay with them, may not be okay with the neighbors, but it's typical mayor speak. It's the consultant. I can blame it on the consultant. It's not me, the mayor, who's making the decision that the noise is too much. He's going to blame it on the consultant and not take accountability for allowing more noise under the host agreement than anyone expected. Also, and I'm going to winding down to my 30 seconds, if the town of Wallingford, meaning the mayor, Economic Development Commission, the town council, wanted to limit noise in the host agreement, they would have done it. they would have written something in that says these are the noise limits. They already had a noise consultant on hand. They already had that. Or they could say, no additional noise will reach the residences after dark or at night or something like that. That could have been written in. It was not written in. Instead, this was drafted as if no one really knows how much noise is going to be escaping the boundaries of the GOTSpace property. No one really knows. But when the consultant learns how much noise on paper, then he'll kind of make up his mind. But the failure to set a limit in the host agreement was a swing and a miss and maybe the most important issue. And some would say it was a rush to get this passed without strong noise protections in the host agreement, because that's where your protections are. Instead, it goes over the planning and zoning, which is by far a second best protection. Tom and then Joe, react to what I said, and we're gonna move on.
I think, and this came up, if we were to set a noise limit, then it would be more difficult to go back to the host agreement to amend or to change if we found out that that was wrong. And who are we to determine at that point? The point that at least I came into it, and I think most of the five, if not all of the five that agreed to the agreement, were that we wanted to open the door to the data centers and knowing that planning and zoning was going to have a larger role than they might normally in just agreeing to a development, but also in developing or allowing the use period of the data centers to the area. I think it was more comfortable for me anyway it's more comfortable for me to have let that be free and have the planning and zoning establish that, and me not have to come back to the host agreement if there was a problem later on and try and amend the host agreement.
Joe, a host agreement could be amended at any time by consent of the parties, of course, but I'm going to ask you a question.
We barely had trouble. Yeah, go ahead. Sorry, I interrupted. We got the five. Like, so the amendment, look at, it came back as an extra, last minute, let's try and rescind it. So, I think we were happy to get the five.
Yeah. Joe, I want you to react to my comments, Tom's comment, but wrap into your response the answer to this question, remembering that you voted against data centers. How much additional noise should the neighbors be expected to tolerate as a result of a data center development? How much additional noise?
Well, that's sort of the impossible question to ask, right? Because noise to one person is not noise to someone else. So I live near 91. I get a lot of noise off of 91, and it's just something you grow accustomed to. So the Thurston neighbors, some of them felt like it was acceptable, some of them felt like it was really difficult. So I think it depends on what the noise is and when and so on. I think the greater point is, the mayor is always very risk averse, right? I think that we generally move very slowly in town because we're concerned about risk. And I think he does a great job at managing risk. On this one, whatever bug got in his ear, we've moved at a pace that's, made a lot of us very uncomfortable. So, I knew going into it that it was going to be tough to rescind the agreement because, it's a contract, right? It's a legal contract. But the conversation was worth having over what do we do if, it's not who we thought they were. If Vice Chairman Laffin's comfortable with him, and he voted yes, then that makes sense to me. I wasn't comfortable, so I voted no. But my concern is that as time moves forward and we find out, more and more about the agreement and the parties involved and whatnot, that level of comfort may disappear. So I'm just, what are our options? And it appears that the power agreement and planning and zoning are our options.
So, Joe, you didn't answer my question. I get that, and no public official will. But that is the only question. That was really one of the top three questions that should have been before the council. Councilors, all 90, and the mayor and ADC. How much extra noise are we expected to tolerate? And the answer will always come back, we're not telling you. And that's what's in the host agreement. We're not telling you. You'll be surprised probably, but we're not going to let you know now, even though now is a critical phase. But that question wasn't addressed. Joe, is voting no on the power supply agreement a legitimate tool to use to defeat a data center projects that was approved by the council in 2021 by a vote of 5-4. Is that a fair tool?
Yes, because the power agreement and the host agreement are separate ideas. So you could find something in the power agreement that you objected to, you know, you could object to the whole project. You know, we've asked this question many times, you know, about people abstaining from voting and whatnot. And according to the law department, you don't need any reason to vote the way that you vote. You vote how you know your conscience. So I think it is a legitimate tool to try to beat it if that's, you know, where we want to go.
Tom, your thoughts on that
Yeah,
question?
ultimately it is. And this came up during the approval for the host agreement, was we knew that it was going to come back for an approval on the power side. So it is. And I think Attorney Farrell's comments were that if people were looking to find or use this power agreement vote, the eventual power agreement vote, as a way to veto or undo the agreement, that they just be careful with their wording so it doesn't put us into a potential lawsuit with rescinding really the host agreement. So I think that was his overall, you know, neutral, unbiased opinion. And if that's how people want to do it, that's how they want to do it. And we are afforded that luxury as counselors, as been, now, I don't always agree with it when there's an abstention. I think you should either vote or not unless you have a conflict. Unfortunately, that is not the way that it's run the past couple of years, and that's the illegal decision. That's fine, but I appreciate or understand that, you know, we do not have to give a reason. We don't even have to comment, right? We can just go through the whole meeting, not say anything, make a vote, and we're done. And that's the end of it. So it is fair. It's legitimate. It's possible, you know. Is it depending on how it's approached, you know, you just want to make sure that that it's ethical.
I think you will agree, and now I got to triage time a little bit. If you agree, just pass on this one. But the way I count the votes with the next council, I don't think the data centers are in jeopardy really. 2 people that voted against the data centers are getting off the council. They're going to be replaced. I don't want to prejudge where those 2 new councilors are going to be, but I don't see anything changing. Do you agree, Joe? Do you agree, Tom? Joe first.
Agree.
Yeah, Tom.
Agree.
Let's talk about the American Rescue Plan Act. Got to change my notes around. Everyone who's watched this show and reads a little bit about local news knows, so I don't want to recreate the wheel, that Wallingford will be sitting on $13 million spread out, I believe, over 2 years. We already have the first half of it, the first tranche of it. The money comes from the federal government. It is to be spent according to federal regulations. And the very broad umbrella intent, I don't want to get into a legal seminar, is to address impacts of COVID. Although there are different categories, and one category you don't have to address impacts of COVID. That has to do with the extent that Wallingford suffered an economic loss. You can buy fire trucks. But I wanted to sort of get into what other towns and municipalities were doing about ARPA, because Wallingford has just kind of begun. As I understand it, Wallingford has been negotiating with a consultant to help guide them through the tangle of federal regulations, but a contract has not yet been signed with that consultant, and everything has been waiting for that to happen. The mayor, I think, said at a public meeting, December, the consultant should be on board. Then you have the Christmas break, then you have the new council, and then, you know, you're looking at end of January, maybe beginning of February, I don't know. Tom, insofar as I described the introductory background, is there anything that should be added? And then over to Joe.
No, I think your introduction was good.
Okay. Joe, anything you want to throw in there before we switch around to?
No, I think I know where this is going. So let's keep moving.
All right, let's keep moving. So I pulled up some, I did some research on the internet to look into our consultant to see what our consultant has been saying about how towns and municipalities should be handling ARPA funds. The consultant I'm talking about is the consultant the town is negotiating with and will hire. What have they said in the past? So our consultant has said in the strategic phase of considering what to do with the $13 million, the government, that would be the town of Wallingford, should identify priority areas where its constituents want to see ARPA funds expended and provide constituents with a mechanism to submit project ideas for funding consideration. We believe that it's critical to engage stakeholders, all stakeholders in the community, engage them to understand what the community prioritizes in use of these ARPA funds. This is our consultant. Then talks about gathering feedback, and I'm moving the cursor around a little bit, and it says, while gathering feedback, government should organize a steering committee. Not my idea. This is not my idea. This is our consultant says, hey, let's get a steering committee. Member of senior management, should chair the committee, should have strong representation from areas of government. And outside members, I'm certain, moving the cursor around there. So that's one thing our consultant has said in the past. Let's go to something else that he said. ARPA spending, our consultant is saying, should be linked closely with the long-term strategic objectives of your government. Funds should be spent. Funds should be spent. Tom, I want you to pay attention to this line here. Funds should be spent on one-time projects expected to have long-term sustainable impact on the community. We recommend, they said again, a steering committee to set guidelines, surveying your constituents. How do you want money spent? They need guidance on what's legal, but within that guidance, how do you want money spent? And then the third bullet is, hey, don't get punch drunk and spend like a drunken sailor. Avoid the temptation to commit all the money on projects known today. For those who like transparency, and sometimes I will playfully say I feel like I'm all alone in this. With so much money, with so much money, numerous parties will be interested in how the money is spent. We recommend establishing a public transparency portal so that everyone can see how the money is being spent. Develop an executive dashboard to present by project, the project status, including money spent and money projected to be spent. I'm skipping a little bit. Get a monthly report out to the town council with some details so they know what's going on. And of course, you got to track all this stuff, which the mayor has talked about. Before I get to these other towns and municipalities, be pithy if you can, Tom. Your reaction to that advice so far, and then we'll go to Joe.
The consultant sounds great.
Okay.
It's everything we were being told was going to come and more.
Yeah.
No, I mean, I appreciate all of the. I appreciate it all. It's and because you want to make sure that you're spending it correctly and with the intent of the original
Joe,
the original money.
Joe, were you on board with what the consultant has opined in those three images I put up?
Yeah, I mean, I really like the direction the consultant's going in because everything is, sort of above board and transparent. And
Wait. You don't know where he's going in Wallingford. You only know what he's written in the past.
That's exactly correct. But I agree with everything that's on the website. But to be fair, I think for the mayor, I think this is, I mean, it's a gift of money, so to speak. But I think it's also a huge pain in the neck.
Yeah,
because this is a lot of money to administer, and there's a lot of requirements, and an error could lead to a lot of other kinds of problems. So I think for him, it's we don't really have the foundation in town to handle this kind of a expenditure all at once. So
okay, let's see what some other towns are doing. And I picked on a nice one, Peachtree Corners, Georgia. Aren't we all interested in what Peachtree Corners is doing? And I picked on Peachtree. Well, first of all, they came up very easily in a Google search. They were a town of about 35,000. And we here in the Northeast, we've been accused of being elite snobs who look down on Georgia. maybe even a town called Peachtree Corners. Sounds podunk, but look what they've done with the American Rescue Plan Act. They have a website, and this is like the main home button that I have up on the screen. Look what they've done. A little explanation of what's going on to orient readers. They got 16 million. See that over there? And then they say it's their intention to have 4 different funds. Interesting approach. And one is a nonprofit. You can see, nonprofit emergency for nonprofits. One's an emergency fund and one is not an emergency fund. A business fund and a capital project fund for businesses. And they have a little buttons on what you got to do to apply. And look at the deadline. It's already come and gone. Wallingford is nowhere near there. I don't even know if Wallingford is going to have a website with buttons you can click with explanations and things like that. I have no idea. There's been no talk about it. There could have been talk about it. Something like this could have been set up long in advance or the wheels set in motion, but their deadline closed October 29. Good for you, Peachtree. Now let's see what else Peachtree has in mind. This again is from Peachtree, Georgia, part of their website. I didn't put everything up here. They got a lot of good stuff. But this is the Nonprofit Emergency Relief Fund, and it's to assist residents who have been negatively impacted as a result of COVID. And it's an emergency relief fund for which qualified nonprofits may apply. And there's a little criteria here as to who qualifies and who doesn't. I won't dwell on this too much, but it all makes kind of sense. And it's good to spread it out so everyone knows what the rules of the game are. So good for Peachtree Corners for a nonprofit emergency relief fund to be distributed by nonprofits that qualify. Let's see what else Peachtree Corners may have. So Peachtree Corners has a little checklist for that nonprofit emergency relief fund, right? Remember, we just talked about that. And so this is what they're telling their residents. If you're a nonprofit, get your IRS documentation, get your state of Georgia stuff, and tell us about yourself. Whether these boxes like, how many people do you serve? Tell us about your board of directors. I'm skipping, obviously. Who's your project manager? Describe how COVID impacted your organization and what's your plan for distributing funds, goals, objectives, verification procedures, and more IRS forms and other stuff. Peachtree Corners seems to have their act together. Good for them. So this is what they're doing. So here I put the title on Peachtree Corners at the top. This is one of the first slides I did, and I wanted to get a peach color. See, I wanted to get a peach color, and that's why that's there. And then I said, why bother? So this is another fund. This is the 2021 Business Assistance Program. Got it? Because they have different funding, the business assistance funding. And it's focused on providing qualified small businesses with funding and operating expenses and things like that. It describes it in general terms with a little bit of a criteria. In Peachtree, 100 full-time equivalent employees or less. They got to operate a business in certain locations. That's just the way Peachtree Corners is organized. So this is how they are approaching it. But what do small business applicants have to provide? Let's check that out with a final Peachtree Corners image. So back to Peachtree Corners, and this is a little checklist. If you're a small business, what do you have to submit? And then the question I would ask, it's a rhetorical question, is whether this information should be public information or is it all kept secret? And secrecy has its benefits and transparency has its benefits too. But in Peachtree Corners, you got to provide some basic information to show that you're legit and you've been around a while. Some internal revenue service forms, bank statements, income statements, profit and loss statements, and things like, if you're behind in your rent or your mortgage, and that's primarily what got you into trouble, well, they got to document it, with this line here, this box that I'm wiggling the cursor on. If it's utilities that, are pulling you under, same thing. How about some utility bills? and so on and so forth. Before I get to the city of Bridgeport, I wanted to go to you guys, and Joe, I'm going to go to you first. Could Wallingford ever match Peachtree Corners? Does Wallingford have it within its DNA, in its will, in its soul, for to set it up this well organized?
If we wanted to, I think we certainly could. I guess you have to look at so Peachtree Corners is going to collect all this data on all these businesses. And then at some point, someone's going to have to make a decision that business A gets a grant and business B doesn't. Yeah. And that's where the rubber meets the road, right? Because no matter how many documents you ask for, that's the part that really becomes fascinating from a political perspective, right? So if Vinny's Deli can get a grant, but like the gas station across the street can't get a grant, then the question is, why is it one way and not the other? So I think it's a fun setup, but it's the execution, I think, is where all the details are.
Tom, same question. It was a loaded question. I assume Peachtree Corners was on the right track. Maybe you don't agree, but if it is generally on the right track, I mean, details, can be shifted around. But do you think Wallingford has it within its will, its soul, its ability to do it this way?
I think so. Yeah, I like the breakout of like, we're going to allot certain funds to businesses, we're going to allot certain funds to nonprofits, we're going to allot, maybe like you called me out, you want me to focus, and maybe you're going to ask me later about a one-time projects, a la community pool or something. And so I'm all for hearing about that. So that might be a decent way if we set like a cap, like we're not building an entire pool, but we're going to use this amount of money towards that pool or project or park or whatever. No, I think it's good. And I think what's really important is that we not leave these businesses that suffered. And you talked about the privacy part, and what is public, what is not. I think we just want to be careful to protect people's private information. But I do understand or appreciate that if they are requesting for federal funds, or and as administered through the town, that at some level they have to be willing to forego or sacrifice that information if they really want the money.
Yeah, I bring it up really to raise the issue, because it's not an issue that should be assumed. I mean, it's an issue that should be discussed, debated, and not swept under the rug. Some good consideration as to how this is going to work. And I raise it because of my experience with the state of Connecticut a few years back. Well, when Governor Malloy was giving money away, hand over fist, to lure businesses into Connecticut with some serious development money, I wanted to know more information. Who were they? How are they going to use the money? Was their tax dollars going to be well spent? So I filed the Freedom of Information request, and the answer I got back was, everything is proprietary. You won't know a thing. Someone gets $5 million, tough luck. You shouldn't be asking where the money is going. So you say, well, supposing it's money poorly spent, you'll never know if it's money poorly spent. So I reacted very negatively to that to that answer under the Malloy administration. I carry that with me. Let's maximize transparency to the extent we reasonably can. That's my talking point.
At least you don't hold any grudges or anything like that. Just let it go. It's fine.
Just let it go. Just let it all hang out. But we'll see. Hopefully this will come up for a discussion on the council. I got some more stuff from the city of Bridgeport. Now, the city of Bridgeport is not at all like Wallingford, but it does kind of illustrate what other towns are doing and where they are on the schedule, and the possibilities. Because sometimes if we just live and work in Wallingford and we read the Record Journal, there's sort of a boundary around Wallingford, and like the outside world doesn't exist. So I just wanted to get a little bit of what the outside world is up to. So here we go with the city of Bridgeport. Let me back up. This is a screenshot of the city of Bridgeport's page dealing with the American Rescue Plan. We'll spend a minute so you can get your eye accustomed to what you're seeing. You got a little description as to what ARPA is all about, because folks don't necessarily know. Again, a little description. I think Bridgeport's getting a ton of money. 110 million. They better be careful. They better be careful on that.
They won't be. They won't be.
No, they've got it all together. I have no concerns.
That's fine. Their mayor, he's got a lot of experience actually in all of this, giving out money and serving as mayor, and they're good. They're good. Even
Serving in
included his
prison,
picture
serving as
there.
mayor.
And
Yeah, yeah.
I just got to say,
Not favoritism. No, it's fine.
I just got to say, Tom and Joe, on this show, sarcasm has a favored place. We live and die by it. It is our bread and butter. Sarcasm is great. So there's Joe Ganim giving a little speech. It's not very long. You can see that there's agenda and minutes if you press the right button on all these committees. They've broken their money down, divided up the jurisdiction to faith-based initiatives, nutrition committee, a small business committee. I don't know where weatherization comes in, but that's okay. They may have money for that if they had an economic loss. Workforce development, I think that's squarely within the federal rules. So, Bridgeport is well on their way. Let's see what else Bridgeport has to offer, and then we'll begin to wrap things up. So again, part of Bridgeport's website, following the cursor, a little description of ARPA, but Bridgeport has got 40 million so far, another 70 million next May, and that's when Wallingford will get its second installment, its second tranche. There's a button that you can click for applications. So you can fill out your application online, I believe is what that says. I clicked it, but it's not active. Why? What is the deadline? August 31. Bridgeport is wait a minute. Let me say it. Bridgeport is so way ahead of Wallingford on this. Again, they're getting organized, they're getting their information, and they're getting their money out to their residences. They're lining up municipal projects, whatever else they are doing. So that ends our little Bridgeport tour, and back to the crew. That's you guys. Joe and then Tom, again, do you see the council having a role, being proactive in trying to set something like this up, or do you see the council being reactive? Whatever the mayor serves up, you'll vote yes or no, but the council is kind of out of its pay grade by trying to initiate, or organize these kinds of efforts to spend the ARPA money. Your thoughts?
So, I think the council was in a reactive mode, maybe when we first started talking about this closer to the beginning of 2021. And I think now that so much time has elapsed, I think we're starting to ask a lot of questions about, what's going to happen from here. So the council is going to have a meeting on Tuesday where we're going to sort of address some of these questions and look at potentially, making a steering committee or whatever to get this process moving forward. So I would like to see the council take an active role. I don't think you can turn this over to just the mayor or any particular town department or, the EDC or whomever, just to determine where all this money goes. I think it's too much money. There's too many stakeholders and so on.
Tom, your response to my question.
Yeah, I think the council will have a role, especially referring back to this consultant's suggestion of creating a committee spread over different aspects and departments of the town. I assume at least one counselor would be involved in that, if not two, one from each party. And I think that, that kind of feedback is good. More minds. And as was discussed earlier, like once all these applications come in, if that's how we field it, and I think that we should, who's going to decide on this? You can't just have one person. You have to have a couple eyes going over it and looking through what businesses need how much and whatnot. And as far as Joe was talking about, we're pushing more aggressively now, or more proactively than before. We were asking questions and maybe reactive. It's kind of I don't know, can you have both? The data centers, it was too fast, and the ARPA funds are too slow. So I don't know. It's I'm not uncomfortable with where we are. You hear Bridgeport was done in August. I don't really love the way that Bridgeport's done anything, so I'm not concerned about that. Peachtree, they literally have a golf cart street system in their town. So
Sure.
They're a little different than Wallingford.
And I presented it that way. They're,
right. Yeah. 4 counselors and a mayor. D.R. Kennedy kept talking, comparing, Wallingford to Georgia for a solid 2 years of campaigning. So I do like the organization, the presentation from Peachtree. Bridgeport just scares me. Maybe it's because I know more about them and everything, but I'm not concerned about the timeline. I think we're on a good path. If we start to go too much slower, that would be ridiculous. But I think with a consultant being hired in this month, going forward, I think it's going to be all right.
So let me just react to your comment. If we had a town manager form of government, and if the town manager put us where we are today with not even having a consultant hired and everything is put on hold, that town manager's contract would be on life support. It'd be on a thin thread. Absolutely. Let me finish now. We've wasted time. Other towns can do it. We're behind the 8 ball, and everything that's come out of the administration is this will not be an open process. There's been no mention of, putting a website up, no mention of a steering committee. And everything is put on hold until really the new year. There will be a meeting coming up next week, as I think Joe said. Hopefully things don't just move sideways. But maybe my expectations of town officials are higher than others. But if I see what other towns are doing, and our town manager says, "Well, we really haven't really started yet, and we haven't really laid the groundwork," I said, "You're on probation, but in an elected system, we have a strong mayor, a partisan council." Yes, a partisan council. This kind of stuff happens. Joe and then Tom can lash back and sort of get even with me there.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know that I question to back it all the way up, Wallingford doesn't need the money, right? It's not like it's do or die with the money. So I think being judicious about how we spend it makes a lot of sense. I just think that, I think we should have all the stakeholders involved, and so on.
Tom.
I agree. And that's my hesitancy on spending it on a town project. I think we have the abilities and the funds and the credit rating to do projects like the pool and the police station. So I want to make sure that we're giving this money out to where it's actually needed. Not that I'm entirely against investigating that or figuring that out. But you talked about town manager versus election. It was an election year in Bridgeport, and everything was due by the end of August. So
there you go. Sure.
This way it's a little separate.
The use of the money I'm going to address on a separate episode. I've been championing public projects over giving out money to people, to businesses, but that's beyond the scope of this episode. So as things move along, we'll see who asks the consultant about public projects, what's possible, what's not. We'll see who asks. We'll see who.
And I look forward to be coming back for that episode.
Yeah, and you will. We'll see who asks for department heads to come up and explain what needs they have. We'll just see. We'll just play it by ear and see how it goes. Hey, let's wrap it up. Thanks for coming on the show. I learned a lot by preparing for this show, and I especially learned about Peachtree Corners. And Georgia is going to be on my mind now until all the money is spent. So congratulations again on your reelection. Good luck on the council. Looking forward to your swearing in ceremony in January. And thank you, viewers, for tuning in to the Citizen Mike Show. We're trying to get these done every 2 weeks now. WPAA broadcasts them at 9:00 on weekdays. We want to give a shout out and a thanks to WPAA, and thank you, viewers. Good night, everybody.